Now, buckwheat is a magical little seed that can be a perfect fit for your food plot program, but you need to understand when, where, why, how, and really look at buckwheat as, is it a fad? It could be, depending on your goals, depending on what you're doing with it. And I'm gonna discuss buckwheat. It's something I've been using for over 20 years, but it's not just me. There's people that have been using buckwheat for decades as a rotation for a soil builder. And buckwheat is an incredible soil builder, but it's also a smother crop. It's probably the #1 smother of weeds. It completely shades out the ground, gives a greenhouse effect, actually holds soil moisture to the ground, puts a lot of organic matter into the ground. There's a lot of matter in buckwheat. It grows up very thick. And so there's a lot that you can do with buckwheat, but you need to understand it. It's not a fad. Something that's been around for many, many decades, and it's a tried and true way. In fact, the old rotations of annual rye, buckwheat, annual rye in the fall, buckwheat in the spring, and rotating those is an incredible way to build your soil. A lot of times with soil builder products right now, we look at so many different complexities, and it almost gets confusing. At the same time, it's oversold, overproduced. And really, when it boils down to it, this is a tried and true farming practice, soil building practice. It's been used for many decades, and it's something that might be right for you. And you can incorporate this magical little plant in with your food plot program, and there's different ways to do it. I talk about my ultimate no-till. I'll skip right down here. My ultimate no-till planting, where I'm using buckwheat. There's buckwheat shortages now out there, and so I want people to actually use this and make sure they're using it correctly. It's something I teach, something I've talked about for a very long time, going back to my food plot book. It's chapter 12 in my 2014 food plot book, but I've talked about it before then too. So it's something that I've been using personally for a long time, but it can really help you in that ultimate no-till. If you just type in ultimate no-till, a lot of this stuff, people say, what do you recommend with your ultimate no-till? What do you recommend with a mock scrape? What do you recommend with a container water hole? How do you do those? Well, I have over 40 water hole videos. I have a dozen or more ultimate no-till food plot videos. And when it comes to mock scrapes, I think I'm over 50 mock scrape videos, and they're all in playlists. Food plots, buckwheat, you can search those online and find them. And so I just want them to help you out. So that's why I tell you how to find them, so you don't have to wait for an answer from me, because sometimes I don't see your comments, even though I'd really like to answer every one of them. Buckwheat is not a fad. It's a magical, great, powerful little seed, and it is an incredible soil builder. It's been in rotation for decades. It's something I use in my ultimate no-till blend, and it's incredible. And I'm gonna go through some buckwheat rules here I think is really important. #1, buckwheat doesn't need to be drilled. Buckwheat does really well throwing on exposed soil, getting a little bit of moisture, and it germinates about as quickly as rye does. I've grown rye in the back of my pickup truck. Buckwheat seed is grown in the back of my pickup truck. The only problem is both turn yellow and die because, of course, there's no nutrients in the back of my pickup. It doesn't have to be drilled. It can be thrown right on top of the soil. It'll grow better on top of soil than oats will, for example. Not maybe as well as clover, various brassica seeds, but definitely better than soybeans and peas. So it's kind of in between, but it's very effective at growing well just thrown on top of the soil. #2, frost seeding. Frost. You can't frost seed buckwheat. You can't plant it before your last frost in the spring, because frost kills it instantly. I talk about all the time, about 20 years ago, mid-2000s, right around there, losing a crop of buckwheat around the 4th of July due to snow flurries and frost and freeze. Knocked out half my buckwheat. All the taller buckwheat it took out, and it kept that little stuff down below that was coming in after a second planting. So it just knocked it out in the middle of July in the UP of Michigan. So it's something you have to be very wary of that. That means in the UP of Michigan, you're waiting until June to plant. In most locations, it's mid-May and beyond. But you have to look at the timing and length of time that you need it used for. Because if you're planting it in my ultimate no-till, if you have great soil, I recommend 6-7 weeks. That's from when you throw it on the soil and get germination to when you actually terminate it. 6-7 weeks. If you have poor soil, you can go 8 to 9 weeks. You can stretch it a little bit. And it all boils down to, you don't want buckwheat that's chest high. I have videos myself of planting buckwheat a little bit early, and that gets armpit high. Very hard to seed into, very hard to work, and almost impossible to rototill and disc into the ground, because it's such a collection of organic matter that is a good thing. It's a smother crop. It adds a huge amount of quality organic matter into the soil, but it can be very problematic if you plant it too early in your area or too late. If you have poor soils, northern areas, you might want to look at a little bit longer growth period. Is it a deer food? Well, it can be at certain times. Deer will tend to nip it in the spring, but once it gets going and established and there's a lot of spring green up in the area, unless there's excessive deer numbers or it's the only game in town like an up north wilderness setting or big hardwood setting, they typically leave it alone. Now that has to do with weed control, how many deer are in the area, what type of soil you have you corrected the pH, have you used deer grow that we use? That's something you can actually correct the ability for plants to uptake the nutrients without adding lime. We use the deer grow. We have plot start, plot boost we use for different periods of time. You can check that out. But bottom line is, it's a deer food during very early in the growth stage. And that means that sometimes it's an appropriate addition to an August food plot that you have something else going to take over. For example, those early buckwheat plants coming in, they'll pick on those, leave some tillage radish alone, leave some peas alone, and then it dies with the first frost and you're left with that base crop and that base crop that you're planning on for the future during the hunting season. So it can be a deer food, but once it dries out in the fall, it's not a deer food in October, November. They're not eating those brown leaves. It turns crispy and brown with first frost. It's the perfect terminating food plot planting variety. What I mean by that is it crushes. You can roll it over with ATV tires. We use a Packer Max from Packer. Fill that up with water, just smashes it down and completely. I've used a lawn roller. I've used logs, chains, things just to drag and break it down. I prefer something wider, something that saves me a little bit of time. That's why I like the Packer Max. But bottom line is it terminates and crushes quickly. There's no other plant that does so. There's no other plant that smothers the ground, controls weeds, and then conserves soil moisture, and then just crushes, lays right down. So it's really easy to terminate. And then we always follow up with a spraying of glyphosate, 2 quarts per acre, when we're looking at our August plots, because we don't want that buckwheat coming in certain plots. So if you have a seed head on there and it goes to seed, it can be problematic depending on what you're adding it to in the fall. And then at the same time, we kill it because if there's any broadleafs growing in there, we want to take those out so we have a weed-free plot going in the fall, because if you have weeds in your plots, you're drastically and significantly reducing the efficiency of your plots and your effectiveness to actually meet your goals of why you're planting that food plot and spending your time and money on that food plot in the first place. Perfect termination. There's nothing else that'll crush and smother the way that buckwheat does without using expensive crimpers and planting equipment. Number 5, you really need to know when, why, where, and how you're planting buckwheat. Make sure that you really have a purpose for it. There's buckwheat shortages out there, and it's kind of disheartening because I want people to use it and use it correctly. You see tons of buckwheat sales, but it's not all about sales. It's about how can you guys use this product to your advantage and get it done correctly and really help yourself when it comes to your food plots, your soil, your deer herd, and your goals going into this fall. Buckwheat is an incredible food plot variety that you can plant. I really urge you to check out my ultimate no-till planting method. That is something I originated back in the early 2000s, mixing peas, beans, oats, wheat, rye, brassicas, lawn seed, lots of different varieties into buckwheat, crushing it down, and then having a great subsequent fall crop or even a spring lawn due to the buckwheat. It's also soil builder, limiting your weeds. It's also, what's really nice about buckwheat used during the summertime is that can limit your use of chemicals. And I'm always looking at, I believe in chemicals, I believe they're important. Someone mentioned you should never preach using glyphosate on your land. We have thousands of acres of ag land planted around here where farmers are using not only glyphosate, 2,4-D, atrazine, 2,4-D that stays in the soil 3 weeks, atrazine that stays in the soil for 60 to 90 days, but they're using pesticides as well on their corn. And here's my little food plots over here using glyphosate. For one, glyphosate is neutralized when it hits soil, but 2, when there's thousands of acres being planted around here, my little acres doesn't amount to anything. I'm not saying that's an excuse for doing something bad, because it's not anything bad. Just trying to offer some perspective, and trying to offer some perspective when it comes to getting good use out of buckwheat and adding it to your food plot program in a quality, successful way this growing season. Now, I'm excited again this year to host our Camp Kicking Bear charity event. Last year we did it in June, and it was a big success. We were able to raise over $21,000 for Camp Kicking Bear. There's some people that actually made comments that they get sick of hearing about this kind of stuff and whatever else. I think they didn't understand that we're actually raising money. This Camp Kicking Bear is, to me, the #1 children's organization that gets kids in the outdoors, their families, especially a lot of kids that don't have the opportunity to do so otherwise. June 11th, I'll have more details coming out about this, but you can email us for early registration. June 11th, it'd be midday, you know, like 11 to 4 type thing, 10 to 5, 10 to 4. What I do is there's 50 people that register for this. We give that all to Camp Kicking Bear. Well, it's a habitat day. We go out for a couple hours on the property and I show you some strategies that you can take home to your own land. Number 3, we have a hunt raffle for 100 people. The registration for 50 people is $300. That gets you in the door to actually see the property and the land. $100 gets you in a hunt raffle times 100 people. We had Leo from Lower Michigan had a hunt last year, many memories, end of September for a couple days. Number 4, lots of door prizes, Matthews bows, blinds. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that we give away, really good stuff for you too. Kids are free. I think we had about 25, 30 kids last year. All proceeds, again, go to Kicking Bear. Every dollar, every dime we raise goes to Kicking Bear. We'll have some other auction. Last year, Chris B came. We might have Kevin Smith, retired Major League Baseball player. I hear that Gary Suter, he's a NHL Hall of Famer, he might show up too. So there's some chance to meet there. And then, of course, Ray Howell. He was here last year. He delivered his testimony. It was an awesome, inspirational talk that he gave to everyone. Hope to see you there. Look for further details on the site and then the description for the video.